Does science contradict the Bible? And more specifically, does science contradict the account of creation that's in Genesis 1? Genesis 1 paints a very clear picture of the beginning of the universe, the formation of the earth, and the start of life on earth. But it seems like this account differs pretty significantly from what science says about all that. So what gives? Is science wrong? Is the Bible wrong? Do they contradict each other? Do we have to pick which one we believe? Well, I'd like to walk you through what each of them says and show you that they do not actually disagree with one another. Now, in order for this to work, we're going to have to let each of them speak on their own terms. We're going to have to let Genesis speak on its own terms, and we're going to have to let science speak on its own terms. Now, let Genesis speak to us. We're going to read it through from start to finish and then dive into each point and look at what it says. And to let science speak, we're going to look at the Wikipedia articles for each of the topics that we're going to examine. The Wikipedia needs no introduction. It's the modern day encyclopedia of everything. And it is the most comprehensive body of current knowledge available. And the neat thing about Wikipedia is that since it's user edited, it's constantly being updated with the newest information. And since it's constantly being updated, it reflects the current consensus. So we can rely on Wikipedia as a good source of the most current scientific understanding and also what the current scientific consensus on that topic is. So we're going to go through Genesis and see what Genesis has to say, and we're going to go through Wikipedia and see what science has to say. And I think we're going to see that the two actually disagree less than you think. So let's go ahead and start by going through Genesis 1. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. All right, let's go ahead and start at the beginning here. First sentence of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, this is already problematic. For centuries, scientists believed that the universe did not have a beginning and existed in a steady state. If we go to the Wikipedia article titled Age of the Universe and go down to the history section, the very first paragraph here in that section says, "Most scientists throughout the 19th century and into the first decades of the 20th century presumed that the universe itself was steady state and eternal, possibly with stars coming and going, but no changes occurring at the largest scale known at the time." So, for centuries, scientists believed that the universe was steady state, eternal, and therefore didn't have a beginning. So this already conflicts with what Genesis is saying, which is that the universe had a beginning and that God created it. So how does this get resolved? Well, in the 20th century, evidence began to mount that the universe was not actually infinitely old. And the first piece of evidence was actually general relativity itself. The field equations of general relativity do not permit the universe to be static. It either has to be collapsing under its own gravity or flying apart under some force, but a steady state universe is not possible according to general relativity. So that was the first indication that scientists had that their assumption of an infinitely old universe was wrong. But it gets better. In the 1920s, a decade later, the American astronomer Edwin Hubble, after whom the Hubble Space Telescope is named, made the intriguing discovery that all of the galaxies in the universe outside of our own Milky Way are flying apart from us and from one another. And this showed, first of all, the universe was definitely not static. But the implication of that is, if everything is currently flying apart, if we can imagine rewinding the universe's history, running it backwards, everything comes together. And if you play it long enough in reverse, everything has to converge on a single point. So this sounds a lot like the universe had a beginning at a definite point in the past, and that we are still living in the outplaying of that. But the real nail in the coffin for scientists came a few decades later in the 1960s with the discovery of what became known as the cosmic microwave background. Essentially, scientists pointed microwave telescopes into the sky, and they noticed no matter where they pointed them, they saw a continuous background buzz of very faint microwaves. These microwaves didn't appear to have a source, they just were everywhere that they looked. And the only explanation for that is that it's the afterglow of the beginning of the universe. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that piece of evidence convinced the scientific community that the universe had a beginning. So within the last century, we went from a scientific consensus that the universe was infinitely old, static, and uncreated, to now every serious scientist in the whole world believing that the universe had a beginning, just like Genesis said. Now, one thing I want to bring up at this point is, since the scientific community accepted that the universe had a beginning, some scientists have proposed that the universe could, in a way, be cyclical, where we have a Big Bang everything flies apart from each other, but then under its own gravitational attraction, that expansion slows to a stop and then reverses, and everything flies back in towards each other and collapses back into a single point, much like it began. And that then the process would begin again. That after that, there would be another Big Bang, another collapse, and that process could go on infinitely. And that therefore the universe could still in a way be said to be uncreated and eternal, even though it's going through this cyclical process. Well, in the last 3 decades, that has actually been disproven. In the 1990s, after I was born actually, scientists discovered that the rate at which galaxies are flying apart from one another is actually increasing and not decreasing. So instead of gravity winning out and eventually slowing and stopping the expansion of the universe, the expansion is just speeding up. Scientists still don't know why. That's an active area of research, but the implication of that is that the universe will not undergo a collapse that will recycle the universe. So the universe will just keep expanding forever, the acceleration will continue forever, and therefore the universe will not ever have a chance to be recycled. That, to me, is very strong evidence that the universe had a definite beginning that was not recycled from another point. Let's move on to the next verse. Verse 2, the earth was without form and void. So what this is saying is that at the beginning of the universe, the earth itself did not exist yet. And that is consistent with the current model of how the universe developed. We don't have to go into a lot of this detail right now, but I do want to take you to the Wikipedia article for the timeline of the early universe. If we look at this nature timeline here, we can see pretty clearly the universe begins down here at the bottom. The Earth and the solar system don't form until about 2/3 of the way up. So scientific consensus is that the Earth and the solar system did not exist when the universe first began, just like Genesis says. All right, let's keep going. So the next thing that Genesis says is, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Well, I want to take you to the Wikipedia article for the timeline of the early universe. If we scroll down to the photon epoch section, we see that until the universe is about 20 minutes old, something called primordial nucleosynthesis was occurring. And this is basically nuclear fusion, just like we see in our own sun, happening all over the universe while the universe was hot and dense. And through this process, a lot of the elements that we see around us were created. The universe reached its approximate chemical ratio of 75% hydrogen, 25% helium, which we see in the universe today at this time. So right off the bat, most of the matter in the universe is already formed in the first 20 minutes. Genesis says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The waters indicating like the primordial substances of the universe. And that's exactly what we're seeing. That within the first 20 minutes of the beginning of the universe, most of the mass of the universe was already assembled into the elements that we see around us today. So the universe began, but then very quickly after that, all of the building blocks of the universe were already formed, just like Genesis says. So let's keep going. Next thing in Genesis, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Now, remember that the universe has been expanding ever since its beginning. Edwin Hubble showed that that process is still going on, and it was certainly still going on right after the Big Bang. As the universe expands, it is decreasing in both mass density and energy density. And the result of that is that this primordial plasma that formed in the first 20 minutes cools off as the universe ages. Now, for a while after the beginning of the universe, everything was so hot and so dense that ordinary matter couldn't exist, that everything in the universe was a superheated plasma, and that plasma actually did not allow light to propagate freely. Plasma consists of separated atomic nuclei and electrons. Both of those have electric charge. Free electric charges prevent light from traveling. If we look at the chronology of the universe Wikipedia page, we see that it wasn't until about the 370,000 year mark that the universe became transparent for the first time. At that point in time, the universe had expanded and cooled enough that the plasma was able to cool off into ordinary gas. And when that happened, the universe became transparent to light for the first time in its history. Well, what happened at that point? Well, all of this energy that had been bouncing around the universe from its beginning in the form of light waves was suddenly free to travel across the universe. If we look back at this article, the newly formed atoms, mainly hydrogen and helium with traces of lithium, quickly reached their lowest energy state by releasing photons. And these photons can still be detected today as the cosmic microwave background. This is the oldest direct observation we currently have of the universe. So, this is the cosmic microwave background that we talked about earlier. When the universe became transparent, all of the matter in the universe suddenly let off a burst of light because light could travel freely for the first time. This light formed the cosmic microwave background that we can still detect today. We have direct evidence that this occurred, and that is the cosmic microwave background that we can see in any direction of the sky. So what does this mean? For the first 370,000 years of its existence, light could not travel anywhere in the universe freely. It was blocked by the superheated plasma. But then, all across the universe and all at once, the entire universe was filled with light. That to me sounds a lot like what I imagine when I read "Let There Be Light." So that's cool, but it feels like cheating, because if the light that was emitted was microwaves, that's a little bit unsatisfying because it's not, well, it's technically electromagnetic radiation, it's not what we think of as light. And so that almost sounds unfair. But that's how we see the light today. And we have to remember that the entire universe has been expanding ever since it began, from the very first moment right up until the present. And that expansion has stretched out the light waves themselves as the universe has aged. So that means that what we're seeing right now as microwaves was not originally microwaves when it was emitted. What would this light have looked like when it was first emitted? Well, we can use our model of the universe and our understanding of how plasma works, which we can figure out from plasma physics labs that we have here on Earth, to figure out exactly what the conditions would have been like at this point in cosmic history when the first light was released. And if we scroll down here in the chronology of the universe article, we can see the photons released by these newly formed hydrogen atoms initially had a temperature energy of around 4,000 Kelvin. This would have been visible to the eye as a pale yellow-orange tint or soft white color. So take a look at that. When this light was emitted, it would have been visible to a human eye as yellow-orange light. That to me sounds exactly like what Genesis is describing. God said, "Let there be light." All at once, across the entire universe, light that would be visible to a human eye suddenly appeared. That sounds exactly like what Genesis is describing. Now, one other thing that I want to point out, Genesis says, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And all throughout the rest of the chapter, it paints this picture of God speaking. And Him speaking is what shapes the universe. Well, does that have any basis in science? Does science suggest anything even remotely like that? I think it does. I want to take you to the Wikipedia page for baryonic acoustic oscillations. Now, these are fancy words. Baryons are particles of ordinary matter. Acoustic means sound. Oscillations mean vibrations. So what this is basically describing is sound vibrations in ordinary matter. Well, take a look at the first sentence of this article. In cosmology, baryon-acoustic oscillations are fluctuations in the density of the visible baryonic matter of the universe caused by acoustic density waves in the primordial plasma of the early universe. What this is saying is that there were sound waves that propagated through the early universe, and that these sound waves shaped the largest scale structures in the entire universe. Science has shown that the very largest things in the entire universe were shaped by sound, just like Genesis says. I think that's pretty cool. Let's keep going. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Let's go back to the chronology of the universe Wikipedia page. If we scroll down to the nature timeline, we see that the first real era that's defined here is actually called the Dark Ages. That occurred right after the earliest universe. So if we go to the Dark Ages section here, we see that within 3 million years, the cosmic microwave background photons had redshifted out of visible light to infrared. From that time until the first stars, there were no visible light photons. So, after the first light is emitted, the universe is aglow with this light, but as the universe expands, that light gets stretched out by the expansion of the universe. And so after 3 million years or so, the light became so stretched out that it was no longer visible to the human eye, and the universe was completely dark. So we have the first light being emitted, and then after that, the first darkness, just like Genesis says. Now I want to take a minute to talk about day and night here. We just had, there was evening and there was morning the first day in Genesis. And so this is where a lot of people will say Genesis claims that the entire universe was created in 6 literal days. I want to take a minute to talk about that. Remember that the Earth itself still doesn't exist yet. We won't see the Earth form until day 3. And the sun, the moon, and the stars, which Genesis even says are put in the sky to give definition to day and night, our timekeeping method, don't appear in the sky until day 4. So I don't think it makes sense for the days that are being talked about here in Genesis, at this point at least, to be conventional human days. And I want to take you to a few Bible passages that I think can shed light on this. Both the Old and the New Testament make the point that God does not see time the same way that we do. That God's perception of time, God's sense of time, is very different from us. 2 Peter 3:8 says, "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day." The Old Testament even takes it a step further. Psalm 94 says, "For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night." And this one in particular shows that there isn't a direct correlation between God time and human time. That it's not a well-defined scale. God just perceives time differently than we do. So since the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars do not exist at this point, when God is already saying that the first day and night have happened, I don't think it makes sense to say that God is talking about earth days. I think these are days from God's perspective, because God is the one who's creating everything. God is telling this narrative. It's coming from God's point of view. And since God's perspective of time is very different from ours, I think it's very fair to say that day and night as God saw them were not literal earth days and nights. All right, let's keep going. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So what we see happening here is that this primordial matter, the waters, are clumping and separating from one another. I want to take you back to the chronology of the universe Wikipedia page. We see here on the nature timeline that after the earliest universe, after the Dark Ages, the next thing that we see is the earliest stars and the earliest galaxies. Now I want to take this opportunity, I want to show you this picture. This is called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. It was taken by the Hubble Space Telescope in 2004. This is a picture of some of the very first galaxies that formed after the beginning of the universe. And what you can see here is exactly like what Genesis described. The matter has clumped into galaxies that are separated from one another by space. And it's not just limited to the early universe. If we look up into our night sky tonight, we see the same thing. This is a picture of one of the most picturesque galaxies, the Sombrero Galaxy, nearby to the Milky Way. Beautiful, beautiful spiral galaxy, but separated from other galaxies by a whole lot of nothing. Now I want to highlight something else here. In addition to the waters being collected to form galaxies, within galaxies, the waters were collected to form other things. These are the things that you see in galaxies like stars and nebulas. And so I want to come to a couple of other pictures of galaxies. This is one of my favorite ones, the Whirlpool Galaxy. You can clearly see here, full of a whole lot of stars, and also the dark and light bands there are nebulas in the plane of the galaxy. You can also see that in this picture of the Triangulum Galaxy, which is a lot closer to our own Milky Way. You can see the same thing, a lot of stars and a lot of nebulas. So the waters were gathered to form galaxies, and then even within galaxies, the waters were gathered to form stars and nebulas. And scientists believe that stars and planets form inside of the nebulas. And so why is that important? Well, I'm going to show you some pictures of nebulas in our own galaxy to help us to understand what's going on here. This is a picture of the Eagle Nebula. This is actually famously called the Pillars of Creation. Scientists have studied this picture and determined that within these pillars of gas here that you see, stars and planets are actively forming. And the same thing here in the Orion Nebula, which is in the constellation of Orion, as the name suggests. You can actually see very young stars forming inside of this nebula right now. Well, it gets better than that. We can tell what these nebulas are made out of by studying the colors of them. So I want to take you to this NASA article called Decoding Nebulae, which is a weird way of saying the plural of nebula. If we come down here to the Eagle Nebula that we were just looking at, this article says that in the optical image, blue represents oxygen, red is sulfur, and green signals both nitrogen and hydrogen. Now I want to make sure you catch that. In this nebula, we have distinct colors that are indicating the presences of hydrogen and oxygen. And it's actually the same thing if we go back over here to the Orion Nebula. In this coloration section, the red hue represents hydrogen recombination lines, and then the green hue is a puzzle for astronomers for a while, but it was later determined that the green spectrum was caused by a low probability electron transition in doubly ionized oxygen. So in both of these nebulas, we have hydrogen and oxygen present, making their presence known by colors in the nebulas. These nebulas are what stars and planets form out of. And if you recall from your chemistry classes, hydrogen and oxygen are the chemicals that make up water. So we literally have the elements of water coming together inside of these nebula and grouping into stars and planets. The waters are gathered just like Genesis says. And out of it, we get stars and planets separated by the expanse of the heavens, also just like Genesis said. So let's keep going. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. If we go back to the chronology of the universe, again to the nature timeline, we see that after the galaxies form, next thing that's highlighted here is that the Earth and the solar system form. Now, one thing I want to point out here is the passage in Genesis makes it sound like water appeared first and then dry land emerged out of that. But this timeline here shows water on Earth starting a little bit after the Earth itself formed. So what gives? Well, within the last 5 years, the scientific consensus on that has begun to shift. So I want to take you to the Wikipedia article on the origin of water on Earth. And the second paragraph in this article says what we were just talking about. It was long thought that the Earth's water did not originate from the planet's region of the protoplanetary disk, i.e., it came from somewhere else at a later time. Recent research, however, indicates that hydrogen inside the Earth played a role in the formation of the oceans. Interesting that science is now saying that the hydrogen and oxygen that was gathered to Earth at the very beginning was used to form the oceans. That sounds a lot like "let the waters be gathered under the heavens." And then if we go down a little bit farther, we see that more recently, in August 2020, within 5 years of when I filmed this, researchers reported that sufficient water to fill the oceans may have always been on Earth since the beginning of the planet's formation. So check that out. As our understanding has gotten better, within the last 5 years, scientists have flipped their understanding from one that was the opposite of Genesis to one that matches up with Genesis exactly. And one other thing that I want to point out, if we look at the Wikipedia article on chronology of continents, we see in this article that the very first continent didn't form until 3.6 billion years ago, which is a good billion years after the Earth itself formed. So, the scientific consensus now states that water has been present on the Earth from its very beginning, and that only after the Earth had existed for a billion years did land emerge out of the water. That's just what Genesis says. The water was gathered into one place, and then the dry land appeared. So we've seen within recent history, science come into perfect agreement with what Genesis already said. Let's keep going. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. Well, I want to take you back to our chronology of the universe, to the nature timeline. We see that after the Earth and the solar system form and we get water on Earth, we see the simplest life appear, single-celled life, and then after that, we get photosynthesis. Well, as you may recall from your science class, plants are famous for photosynthesizing. That is the process by which plants breathe in carbon dioxide and use sunlight to convert it into oxygen, and thereby produce energy for themselves. So we see photosynthesis occur as the very next thing. The other thing I want to point out here is we also see, after photosynthesis, almost the next thing is sexual reproduction. If you think about it, the way plants reproduce is by bearing seed, and that is a sexual reproduction process. So what we see here is photosynthesizers appear on Earth, which plants are famously among those, and sexual reproduction begins shortly after that. Plants reproducing sexually sounds exactly like what Genesis is describing, the very first plants. Now, some of you will probably say, yeah, that's cheating because those weren't plants the way we think of them. And you're right. These would have been much simpler plants than the ones that we see today. If we take a look at the Wikipedia article for the evolution of photosynthesis, you can see, photosynthesis began about when that other diagram showed. And then the earliest true plants formed about 800 million years ago. So you're right. But either way, the next thing in the chronology is that plants that reproduce sexually appear on the earth, just like Genesis said. Moving on. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. Now, just a point of clarification, the greater light and the lesser light that are being referred to here, those are the sun and the moon, respectively. And Genesis even says here that, like we were talking about earlier, the sun and the moon define time on Earth. So again, since this is just now occurring on day 4, I think it's reasonable to say what we did about the days in Genesis. But this presents a bit of a conundrum. This is talking about the stars, the sun, and the moon appearing, but didn't we already see all those form on day 2? Yes, we did. But I think that's not the point of this passage. The original Hebrew word here for heavens, samarim, can mean either sky, space, or heaven. Sky, like what we see from the ground, space being outer space, or heaven being where God lives. And this makes intuitive sense. We kind of use the word heavens in English the same way. So, well, if we take a step back here, you'll notice that we started out looking at the universe as a whole, and we've been zooming in as we go through Genesis. We start by looking at the entire universe, the first light, the first darkness, then we looked at galaxies forming, then stars forming, and now Earth forming. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that now all of a sudden we would jerk the camera view back out to a universe scale to talk about the stars and the sun forming. Instead, what I think this is talking about is a perspective from the Earth still, which would mean that the definition of heavens that we're using in this context would be the sky. And so what that means then is that rather than saying that this is the point at which the sun, the moon, and the stars formed, this is the point at which they become visible in the sky. And this is a very important point. As we saw in the chronology of the universe, after photosynthesis began, we see the next event that's described is atmospheric oxygen appearing. So, again, like we said, photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. And once they started doing that, as you can see on this timeline, the Earth's atmosphere filled up with oxygen for the very first time. Well, that's important because that means that the atmosphere has not always looked the way that it does to us. When we go outside and look up at a clear sky, it looks transparent to us. We can easily see the sun, the moon, and the stars. But what did the atmosphere look like before it was filled with oxygen? Well, I want to take you to the article for Saturn's moon Titan. This is a really interesting celestial body. It's the second largest moon in the solar system, behind only Jupiter's Ganymede, bigger than our own moon, as a matter of fact. And if we come down to this section here, prebiotic conditions in life, it says that scientists surmise that the atmosphere of early Earth was similar in composition to the current atmosphere on Titan. So we can learn what the atmosphere on Earth used to be like before it was filled with oxygen by taking a look at Saturn's moon Titan. Well, if we scroll back up to the top here, you can see, just at a glance, it almost looks like that picture is out of focus. That's because the atmosphere is really, really hazy. And if we scroll down a little bit further, there's a diagram here of the makeup of Titan's atmosphere. You can see that there are 2 layers of haze there. And it gets even better. Titan is the only object in the outer solar system beyond the orbit of Mars that we have landed a probe on. Back in 2005, as part of the Cassini mission, a little probe called Huygens was dropped from space into Titan's atmosphere, and it eventually landed on the surface of the moon. And as it fell, it took pictures. Again, the only pictures that we have of the surface of an object beyond Mars. And those pictures are right here in this article. If you click on them, you can see what these pictures show is a landscape that is completely shrouded in haze. So what does that mean for us? That means that the Earth's atmosphere would have looked like this before it was filled with oxygen. It would have been hazy. So if you were on the surface of the Earth at the time, you would not, and you looked up into the sky, you would not have seen the sun, the moon, or the stars. All you would have seen was a dull haze. So it was only after plants began photosynthesizing and filling the atmosphere with oxygen that the sky became the transparent sky that we see today. And only at that point would the sun, the moon, and the stars have appeared in the sky and become visible to someone standing on the surface. That sounds a lot like what Genesis is describing. That after plants appeared, then the sun, the moon, and the stars appeared in the night sky. All right, let's keep going. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. So the very first thing that we see happening here is that the waters become filled with all kinds of sea creatures. Well, this is the point at which we need to start talking about evolution, because as we all learned in school, evolution says that species change and develop and appear and grow gradually, and that they radiate gradually to form new species, that's a continual, ongoing process. But let me take you to the Wikipedia article on something called the Cambrian explosion. And I'm just going to start from the top here. The Cambrian explosion, also known as the Cambrian radiation or Cambrian diversification, is an interval of time beginning approximately 538 million years ago in the Cambrian period of the early Phanerozoic, when a sudden radiation of complex life occurred and practically all major animal phyla started appearing in the fossil record. It lasted for about 13 to 25 million years and resulted in the divergence of most modern metazoan phyla. Then if we skip down to the second paragraph, it says, "Almost all present-day animal phyla appeared during this period, including the earliest chordates, which is vertebrates." So take that in. This is literally the first 2 paragraphs of a Wikipedia article saying that all modern animal phyla appeared on Earth during the exact same period of time, all at once. Just like Genesis said. They did not appear gradually, they all appeared on Earth at once, just like Genesis said. So then the next thing that we see is that birds appear. Well, I want to take a bit of a detour here and bring up another point which y'all are probably wondering about, and that is, when are we going to start talking about dinosaurs? What does Genesis say about dinosaurs? Well, if we come to the Wikipedia article for bird, the second paragraph in this article says, Birds are feathered theropodid dinosaurs and constitute the only known living dinosaurs. The overwhelming consensus stated here on the second paragraph of the Wikipedia article on birds says that birds are dinosaurs. And then, if we go to the dinosaur Wikipedia page, the very first paragraph of this article says dinosaurs can therefore be divided into avian dinosaurs, birds, and the extinct non-avian dinosaurs, which are all dinosaurs other than birds. So the overwhelming scientific consensus is that birds are dinosaurs. So when Genesis talks about birds appearing on the earth, I don't think it's a stretch to say that that's referring to dinosaurs, because birds are dinosaurs. And if we're talking about the first dinosaurs appearing in the form of birds, then I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is when the other dinosaurs that we're familiar with appeared as well. And if we look at our chronology of the universe, and we need to start zooming in here because we're getting close to the top of our timeline. So let's go to the Wikipedia article for the Phanerozoic Eon, which the Cambrian explosion article mentioned. After the Cambrian here, and a little time elapses, then we start to see the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. And as we all know from watching movies, Jurassic is when dinosaurs appeared on the Earth. So after the Cambrian explosion, after the Earth's seas became filled with all of the types of sea creatures, at least all of the phyla, then after that, we get the Jurassic period when the dinosaurs that we are used to thinking of them as roamed the Earth. And that lines up exactly with the chronology that Genesis gives us. So what we have here is the waters become filled with all types of sea life, all modern animal phyla. Then after that, we have the era of the dinosaurs, which includes birds, which are dinosaurs. I think that matches up exactly with what Genesis is describing here. So let's move on. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So what's happening here? This is where livestock, beasts of the earth appear on the earth for the first time. Well, to me, that sounds a lot like mammals as we think of them, cattle, basically. And if we come back here to the chronology of the universe, after the Cambrian explosion, the next event that's highlighted is the earliest mammals. So just like Genesis said, after the Cambrian explosion, after the birds and the dinosaurs appeared, the next thing that happens is we get the first mammals. And if we zoom in a little bit further, if we go back to our diagram of the Phanerozoic, if we click on the Cenozoic, the most recent era, the Cenozoic is also known as the Age of Mammals because the terrestrial animals that dominated both hemispheres were mammals. So after the oceans were filled with animals and the birds/dinosaurs appeared, the very next thing that happened is that mammals dominated the earth, just like Genesis says. So back to Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Well, you probably all already know how the story is going to end. The very last thing on our chronology, the earliest humans. Humans were the last thing that God created according to Genesis, and according to the nature timeline, humans were the latest event on our cosmic timescale. And the rest, as you know, is literally history. And that brings us to the end of Genesis's account of creation. So what have we just seen? Science has come into complete agreement with what Genesis says. So much so, as a matter of fact, that a nature timeline in the chronology of the universe Wikipedia page reads like it could be a study guide for Genesis 1. And we just went through it from bottom to top, and the chronology that it lines out matched up perfectly with Genesis 1. I want to read for you Psalm 19. This was written by King David 3,000 years ago. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. King David, speaking by the Holy Spirit, prophesied 3,000 years ago that everything in creation would point back to God. And we've just shown that it does. Everything in the entire universe points back exactly to the story of God creating it all in Genesis 1, and it points back to God himself. What do we take away from this then? Well, first of all, science and the Bible both claim to be truth. And the fact that they now completely agree with one another means that they corroborate each other's truthfulness. So, to the extent that we believe and trust science, we can believe and trust Genesis 1, and by extension, the rest of the Bible. The entire Word of God is completely trustworthy and true, down to the most minute detail. As if we've shown that Genesis 1 matches up with science, then how much more does all of God's Word deserve our trust? And if we can trust the Bible, then we can trust the God who authored it. We can trust him with our lives. We can trust him with everything of ours. And not only that, we don't have to be afraid of science anymore. Science, we have just showed, points the way back to God. So Christian, you can study science. You can learn about the universe. You can study astronomy and advance scientific knowledge, knowing that you are not going to be disproving the Word of God, but confirming it. You will be discovering what God has hidden in creation, and you will be bringing science closer into alignment with what the Bible already says, continuing the trajectory of the last century. So don't be afraid. Let your imagination run wild. Let your curiosity run wild. Be free. It's what your Heavenly Father would want for you. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I hope it has given you clarity and insight, and I hope that you've been blessed by it. Let me know in the comment section what you think, if you agree or disagree with anything. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so much.